Well, joining me now is CTV News political commentator and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair. Morning, Tom.
Good to be with you, Matt.
Tom, it was on this show, I think a few weeks ago, that we talked about, this was a political move by Danielle Smith, that the likelihood of this pipeline not being built was very strong. However, here we are. I'm not saying that, there's lots of hurdles still to clear, but it looks like the government and the federal government at that might be on board. What do you make of the latest developments?
It's very important what's happening now, and it goes to what we saw with the budget. I can recall the head of the Green Party suddenly, after having said that there was no way she would ever approve that budget or support it, it was out of the question. She voted for the budget. And that, for me, was an indication that environment was slowly slipping off the table. I'll have two remarks. The first has to do with the environmental aspect. The second has to do with the internal political aspect for the federal Liberal Party. On the environment, David Eby speaks common sense. The First Nations communities and nations in that area are firmly opposed. If they're talking, again, a new iteration of what they were calling Northern Gateway before into the Douglas Channel, it's a non-starter. Is it perhaps possible that Prime Minister Carney is simply trying to purchase peace with Danielle Smith, knowing himself that there's no proponent for the project? Because that's what Adrian Dix, the Energy Minister of BC, said, and David Eby, the Premier. I think they're both right, and I think that Carney knows that they're right. So is he simply trying to mollify her and say, no, I'm not against it. I'm going to remove the tanker ban, but can the thing ever get built without First Nations approval? The United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People that Canada signed talks about prior informed consent. And there will be no consent to this project. So when I hear the head of the opposition in BC rolling in the way he did with his superlatives and his exaggerated language, yeah, okay, you're that opposed. David Eby made an incredible offer yesterday. He said, if you want to increase the capacity of the one that we just built with $37 billion of taxpayers' money, that's fine. That's the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Go ahead, increase the capacity. Now, that is not something I would have ever heard a head of the NDP say in BC, but what he's trying to do is to offer up some sort of peace offering, saying we're not opposed to getting more oil to the coast, but we're certainly not going to be building another pipeline across BC. So I think that that's the way the thing lands. With regard to the internal aspects of the Liberal Party of Canada, keep an eye on people like Jonathan Wilkinson, who was the former Energy and Environment Minister in Ottawa. He's been left on the sidelines. Keep an eye on someone like Stephen Guilbeault. Guilbeault staked his credibility as an environmentalist in backing everything that Trudeau and now Carney has done on the environment. But he's no fool. This thing cannot go through in Canada have any plausible argument that we're going to respect our obligations under the Paris Climate Agreement. So if you start losing, and Karina Gould is another person expressing misgivings, and I would spontaneously throw into that mix people like Nathaniel Erskine Smith. So you will wind up with a coterie of people within the caucus of the Federal Liberal Party who might be willing to break ranks. Now, we've been talking a lot about the single Conservative, Chris d'Entremont, who went over to the Liberals, but we haven't been thinking a lot about the internal dissent within the Liberal caucus. And I think that if Prime Minister Carney and the people around him is not careful, he might wind up in a much more difficult situation the next time there's a confidence vote.
Right, and I think that's an interesting point that you bring up too, because all these different relationships, whether it's with premiers, whether it's clearly inside of his own party, but clearly the Prime Minister wants to be getting things done, and he's trying to remove some of these barriers to get these things done as quickly as possible, right? But maybe forgetting some of what might happen, some of the fallout from that as he pushes forward with some of these decisions. Perfectly
well said, and Carney is all about that. He's saying we have, and that was the terminology of Finance Minister Champagne. The boastful, we're an energy superpower. Forget about the planet, forget about future generations, forget about the environment. We're an energy superpower, which we are. We have tons of capacity. So if the purpose is to drill, baby, drill, and to get the stuff out of the country as fast as possible, we can't give ourselves a clear conscience, Matt, by saying, oh, it's going to be burned somewhere else on the planet. It doesn't count in our balance sheet of greenhouse gases. It does. And Canada's wildfires alone, those have to be filed and tabulated with the United Nations under the Paris Agreement. We've blown past anything that we thought we were able to do in the next decades to try to reduce our carbon footprint. So it is a very vexing time. There is no, Prime Minister Carney's on his way to a G20 meeting. There's nobody in that room that knows more about the environment than Mark Carney. There's nobody in that room who knows more about the importance of reducing our greenhouse gases and saving the planet from global warming and climate change. But is he going to simply keep pushing the same agenda that says we're going to exploit and operate as much as possible, as quickly as possible in the oil patch to get more money into the country to compensate for the current problems, that are short term with Donald Trump? Well, that remains to be seen, but that's certainly what it appears to be his priority right now.
Certainly interesting. CTV News political commentator, former NDP leader Tom Mulcair with us this morning. Thanks, Tom, for this.
All the best, Matt.